We're 4 weeks into this war. We fired 850 Tomahawk missiles we can't replace fast enough. Iran destroyed $1 billion AWACS aircraft using intelligence networks we didn't know existed. American service members are wounded. Our bases are vulnerable. And here's what nobody in Washington wants to admit. We can't win this war. Not because our military isn't capable, not because our technology isn't superior, but because we built a military designed to fight short, decisive wars against conventional adversaries. And Iran isn't fighting that war. They're fighting an asymmetric, attritional conflict designed to outlast us. And the math doesn't work in our favor. This is the truth about why American military power is failing in Iran, and it's a truth that should terrify everyone who understands what's actually happening. Let me be very clear about what I mean when I say we can't win. I'm not saying American forces can't defeat Iranian forces in direct combat. We can. I'm not saying we can't destroy Iranian military infrastructure. I'm not saying we can't conduct successful strikes. What I'm saying is that military success at the tactical level is not producing strategic victory. And the longer this war continues, the clearer it becomes that Iran's strategy is working and ours isn't. Here's the fundamental problem. We built a military for one type of war, and Iran is fighting a completely different type of war. We optimize for shock and awe, overwhelming firepower, rapid decisive operations, technological superiority that breaks enemy will to fight. That approach worked brilliantly in 1991 against Iraq. It worked again in 2003. It's the American way of war refined over decades, but Iran studied those conflicts. They analyzed what made American military power so effective, and they designed their entire military posture around negating our advantages. They don't try to match us conventionally. They don't try to fight the war we're prepared for. Instead, they built a force designed for asymmetric, attritional warfare, cheap systems in large numbers, dispersed forces that are hard to target, intelligence networks that identify our vulnerabilities, a strategy based on survival and patience rather than decisive battle. And it's working. 4 weeks in, Iran's government is still functioning despite losing leadership. Their military is still operating despite heavy damage. They're still launching attacks. They're still hitting back. And most importantly, they're forcing us to burn through resources at unsustainable rates while they use cheap systems that they can replace more easily than we can replace ours. The Tomahawk crisis is Exhibit A. We fired 850 of these missiles in 4 weeks. That's multiple years of production burned through in a month. And Iran is still functioning. Every missile we fire costs $2 million. Every cheap Iranian drone costs $30,000. We're playing an economic game we can't win because the cost ratios are absurd. For the price of one Tomahawk, Iran can produce 70 drones. Think about what that means for sustained operations. The AWACS destruction is Exhibit B. Iran proved they can strike precision targets at American bases using intelligence networks we didn't know they had. That's not just a tactical loss. That's a strategic indicator that they've penetrated our security. They know where our valuable assets are, and they can hit them when they choose. Every base in the region now has to assume Iran has current intelligence on force dispositions. That forces us to devote massive resources to security and counterintelligence that could otherwise be used for offensive operations. And here's what ties it all together. Iran doesn't need to defeat us militarily. They just need to survive long enough that the war becomes unsustainable for Washington. Politically, economically, militarily, they're betting that eventually the costs will exceed what America is willing to pay. And they're probably right. Let me break down why this strategy works. First, there's the industrial sustainability problem. American defense production is optimized for peacetime contracts and limited wartime surges. We build small quantities of very sophisticated systems. When we burn through stockpiles in wartime, we can't quickly scale production to replace them. The supply chains are too complex. The skilled workforce is too limited. The facilities can't be easily expanded. Even if Congress appropriated unlimited money today, we wouldn't see significant production increases for years. Iran, on the other hand, has built an industrial base designed for mass production of simple systems. They can scale drone and missile production relatively easily. Their supply chains are shorter and simpler. They don't need the same level of precision and sophistication, so they can use more readily available components and less skilled labor. In an attritional war, their production model beats ours. Second, there's the military sustainability problem. We built forces designed for short, intense operations. When those operations extend beyond a few weeks, we start running into problems. Maintenance cycles get compressed. Parts wear out. Crews get fatigued. Aircraft fly more hours than planned. Ships stay deployed longer than intended. All of that degrades readiness and effectiveness over time. We're seeing it now 4 weeks in, and already we're experiencing sustainment challenges that weren't supposed to appear for months. Iran expected this. They designed their military posture around the assumption that if they can survive the initial American onslaught, our operational tempo will decline. And they're being proven right. Our strike rates are already decreasing compared to week one, not because we've run out of targets, but because we're running into logistical and sustainment constraints. Third, there's the political sustainability problem. American wars are politically sustainable when they're short and successful. When they extend beyond a few months without clear victory, domestic support erodes. Opposition builds. Questions get asked about costs and objectives. We're already seeing this in the protests over immigration enforcement. Imagine what happens when casualty numbers rise, when the costs become clearer, when people start asking why we're still fighting a war that isn't producing decisive results. Iran's leadership understands this. They're not trying to win battles. They're trying to make the war long and costly enough that eventually political pressure in Washington forces a settlement. It's the same strategy that worked against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, the same strategy that worked against America in Vietnam and Afghanistan. Avoid decisive defeat, inflict steady costs, wait for the stronger power to give up. Fourth, there's the strategic opportunity cost. Every day we're engaged in Iran is a day we're not postured for other contingencies. China is watching. They're noting that we've depleted Tomahawk stockpiles. They're observing that our forces are tied down in the Middle East. They're calculating that this might be an opportune moment to pressure Taiwan or make moves in the South China Sea. The longer the Iran war continues, the more vulnerable we become globally. Russia sees the same opportunity. North Korea sees it. Every adversary is noting that American military power, while still formidable, has constraints, that we can't fight everywhere at once, that sustained operations deplete our capabilities. That's intelligence you can't buy. It's being demonstrated in real time. Now, let me address the argument that we just need to hit Iran harder, escalate, use more force, destroy more targets. The problem with that approach is that it doesn't solve the fundamental strategic problem. We've already struck 15,000 targets. We've destroyed 70% of Iran's military-industrial capacity. We're planning to push that to 90%, and Iran is still fighting. You can destroy infrastructure, but you can't destroy will. You can degrade military capability, but you can't eliminate asymmetric options. Iran still has drones. They still have missiles. They still have intelligence networks. They still have proxy forces throughout the region. Even if we destroyed every visible military target in Iran tomorrow, they'd still be able to conduct operations using cheap systems and unconventional approaches. And escalation brings risks. If we expand the war further, more strikes, more targets, potentially ground operations, we just burn through more resources faster. We might accelerate Iranian collapse, but we also accelerate our own resource depletion. And if Iran doesn't collapse quickly, we're in an even worse position than we are now. My sources tell me there are intensive debates within the Pentagon about this. Some officials argue for escalation, hit them so hard they can't recover. Others argue for adjusting strategy, accept that this will be a longer war and pace operations accordingly. Others argue for negotiated settlement, recognize that decisive military victory isn't achievable, and look for diplomatic off-ramps. What nobody wants to admit publicly is that we may have started a war without fully thinking through what victory looks like and how to achieve it sustainably. We assumed Iran would fold quickly under American firepower. That assumption was wrong. And now we're committed to a conflict that's consuming resources at unsustainable rates without producing decisive results. The strategic calculus is brutal. If we continue at current intensity, we'll deplete critical munitions within months and be forced to either accept reduced operations or resort to less precise weapons that cause more collateral damage. If we reduce intensity to preserve munitions, Iran gets breathing room to reconstitute, and we admit we can't sustain the pressure. If we escalate further, we burn through resources even faster with no guarantee of breaking Iranian resistance. Every option involves accepting limitations we didn't plan for. Every option involves costs and risk we didn't anticipate, and Iran's strategy of strategic patience exploits all of this. They don't need to win. They just need to not lose long enough that we can't sustain the war. Here's what makes this even more concerning. Iran prepared for this specific scenario for 30 years. After watching what American military power did to Iraq, they systematically built a military posture designed to survive and strike back against a technologically superior adversary. They invested in cheap systems that can be mass-produced. They developed asymmetric capabilities like drones and precision missiles. They built intelligence networks that could identify American vulnerabilities. They positioned proxy forces throughout the region. They hardened critical infrastructure and dispersed forces to make targeting difficult. This wasn't improvised. This was methodical preparation for exactly the war they're now fighting. And we're discovering that all our technological advantages and all our sophisticated capabilities don't necessarily produce decisive victory when the enemy has structured their entire approach around negating those advantages. The missile crisis, the AWACS destruction, the base vulnerabilities, these aren't isolated incidents. They're manifestations of a larger strategic problem. Yeah, we're fighting an enemy who prepared for this war differently than we did, who built their forces around different assumptions, who developed a strategy that exploits our weaknesses rather than plays to our strengths. And we're finding out that our approach, refined over decades of fighting conventional adversaries, doesn't work as well against an adversary who refuses to fight conventionally. China is absolutely studying this. They're analyzing how Iran is using asymmetric approaches to complicate American military operations. They're noting the ammunition depletion rates. They're observing the basing vulnerabilities. They're learning lessons about how to challenge American military power without trying to match it conventionally. Taiwan planners should be very concerned because the same approaches Iran is using, cheap systems in large numbers, intelligence-enabled precision strikes, asymmetric operations, are exactly what China would use in a Taiwan scenario. Russia's learning too. They're watching how American logistics struggles under sustained high-tempo operations. They're noting our industrial production constraints. They're observing that despite our technological superiority, we have sustainability limits. All of that informs how they think about potential future conflicts with NATO. The Iran war is becoming a demonstration of American military limitations, not because we're losing battles, but because we can't translate battlefield success into strategic victory against an adversary who's fighting asymmetrically and patiently. That's a problem that extends far beyond Iran. It's a problem that affects how adversaries think about challenging American interests globally. And here's the hard truth. I don't see an easy solution. We can't quickly rebuild our defense industrial base. We can't suddenly change how our military is structured. We can't magically develop the capability to fight sustained attritional wars when we've spent decades optimizing for short, decisive ones. These are long-term structural problems that can't be fixed in the middle of an active conflict. What we can do is recognize the problem and adjust accordingly. That might mean accepting that this war will be longer and less decisive than planned. It might mean pacing operations to match what we can actually sustain. It might mean looking for diplomatic solutions that allow us to declare victory without having to achieve total Iranian collapse. None of those are satisfying options, but they might be the only realistic ones given the strategic situation we're actually in. The alternative is to continue on the current trajectory and discover 6 months from now that we've depleted our stockpiles, exhausted our forces, and accomplished nothing decisive, that Iran is still fighting, that our global posture is weakened, that adversaries are emboldened, that political support has collapsed. That's the path we're currently on unless something changes. This is why I say we can't win this war as currently structured, not because American military power isn't formidable, but because we're fighting the wrong war with the wrong strategy based on the wrong assumptions. And until that's acknowledged and addressed, we're going to keep burning through resources without achieving the decisive victory everyone assumed would come quickly and easily. Iran is proving that asymmetric, patient, attritional warfare can frustrate even the world's most powerful military. And that's a lesson that will shape conflicts for decades to come. Let me get more specific about what winning even means in this context, because that's part of the problem. What does victory look like? Regime collapse? Complete military defeat? Iranian surrender? None of those outcomes appear achievable at acceptable cost given current trajectory. Iran's government is decapitated but still functioning. Their military is degraded but still operational. They're absorbing punishment that would have broken most adversaries, and they're still fighting back. Part of the problem is that we define success in traditional terms: destroy enemy military capability, break their will to fight, force capitulation. But Iran structured their entire approach around not losing rather than winning. They don't need to defeat American forces. They just need to survive and keep fighting long enough that continuing the war becomes untenable for Washington. That's a fundamentally different definition of victory, and it's one that favors the defender who's willing to absorb costs. Think about what survival means for Iran versus what victory requires for America. Iran survives as long as their government maintains control, as long as they can continue launching attacks, even if at reduced intensity, as long as they don't surrender. That's a low bar. They're already meeting it 4 weeks in, despite everything we've thrown at them. American victory, on the other hand, requires actually breaking Iranian resistance, forcing regime change or surrender, eliminating their ability to threaten American interests. That's a much higher bar, and it's not clear we can reach it with available resources. This asymmetry in victory conditions is crucial to understanding why Iran's strategy works. In Vietnam, the Viet Cong didn't need to conquer South Vietnam militarily. They just needed to not lose until American political will collapsed. In Afghanistan, the Taliban didn't need to defeat NATO forces in battle. They just needed to outlast international commitment. Iran is applying the same logic. They're betting they can outlast American willingness to pay the costs of this war, and they're probably right to make that bet. American society is not structured for sustained sacrifice in optional wars. We can mobilize enormous resources for short periods, but extended conflicts without clear progress erode support quickly. We're already seeing domestic tensions over completely unrelated issues. Imagine how that intensifies when the war costs become clearer, when casualties mount, when people start asking what we're actually accomplishing. My sources tell me that Iranian leadership has been explicit about this in their internal discussions. They reference Vietnam and Afghanistan constantly. They talk about American strategic impatience. They calculate that if they can survive 6 months, a year, 18 months, however long it takes, eventually domestic pressure in the United States will force a settlement that leaves the Iranian regime intact. And every week they survive makes that bet look smarter. Now let's talk about the specific ways Iran's strategy exploits American vulnerabilities, because it's not just about patience. It's about systematically targeting the seams in how American military power works. The ammunition crisis is one seam. They force us to expend expensive systems against cheap targets. The intelligence penetration is another seam. They identify vulnerabilities we thought were secure. The dispersed operations are another seam. They make targeting difficult and resource intensive. Iran also exploits our alliance structures. The strike on Prince Sultan Air Base puts pressure on our relationship with Saudi Arabia. If the Saudis start questioning whether American forces on their soil make them targets without providing security, that erodes the basing access we need. Same with other regional partners. Every Iranian strike on a base that hosts American forces creates political friction with the host government. That's asymmetric warfare at the diplomatic level. They exploit our force generation model. We rotate units in and out of theater on set schedules. Iran knows this. They can time operations to catch units during transition periods when readiness is lower. They can target aircraft and personnel when they know our defensive posture is weakest. That's intelligence-enabled operational planning that leverages understanding of how American military logistics work. They exploit our risk aversion regarding casualties. We've built a military that emphasizes force protection. Minimizing casualties is a strategic priority. Iran knows this. Every American service member wounded or killed has strategic impact beyond the tactical loss. It generates media coverage, political pressure, questions about whether the war is worth the costs. Iran can inflict strategic effects with relatively small tactical actions because of how American society responds to casualties. They exploit our dependence on technology. We built a way of war that assumes technological superiority provides decisive advantage. When that technology is countered, whether through electronic warfare, cyber operations, or just simple asymmetric approaches that don't require matching our technology, our advantage erodes. A $2 million missile and a $30,000 drone produce the same result if both hit their targets. Iran forces us into situations where our technological edge doesn't matter, and they exploit time. We're impatient. We want quick results. Iran is patient. They can absorb punishment for months or years if necessary. That patience is itself a weapon when fighting an adversary who expects rapid victory. Every week this war continues without decisive American success is a propaganda victory for Iran. It proves they can stand against American military power. It demonstrates to other adversaries that the United States can be resisted. Here's another uncomfortable reality. Iran's strategy is replicable. Other adversaries watching and learning. If relatively weak, Iran can frustrate American military operations through asymmetric approaches, patient resistance, exploitation of vulnerabilities. Why can't others? China has far more resources. Russia has sophisticated capabilities. Even smaller adversaries like North Korea can look at this and think they could survive American military action if properly prepared. That strategic cost of not achieving quick, decisive victory. Every day war drags on, every setback experienced, every resource constraint encountered, all intelligence for adversaries. They're learning what works against American military power, identifying exploitable vulnerabilities, seeing United States, despite technological advantages and massive budget, has limitations exploitable by patient, asymmetric strategies. Let me be specific about what I think should happen, though I know it won't. We should pause offensive operations. Acknowledge current approach isn't producing decisive results at sustainable cost. Use pause to rebuild ammunition stockpiles, reassess strategy, determine whether continuing serves American interests. Look for diplomatic off-ramps allowing us to declare success and withdraw without achieving total Iranian defeat. Won't happen because politically untenable. Can't pause war after 4 weeks and admit strategy isn't working. Can't acknowledge enemy surviving better than expected. Can't suggest diplomatic settlement when, promising decisive military victory. Political costs of honesty too high, so we'll likely continue current trajectory. Keep firing missiles we can't quickly replace. Keep losing high-value assets to asymmetric strikes. Keep burning resources without decisive results. Eventually forced to either escalate dramatically with all risks and costs that entails or accept some version of outcome I'm suggesting anyway, except after depleting far more resources and demonstrating even more clearly American military power has limitations. The fundamental problem is strategic. We assumed this would be a conventional war where overwhelming force produces quick victory. Iran prepared for an asymmetric attritional war where survival equals success. Those are incompatible strategies, and right now Iran's strategy is working better than ours. Until American leadership acknowledges that and adjusts accordingly, we're going to keep experiencing setbacks and resource constraints while Iran continues to survive and strike back. This is the hard truth about modern American military power. We're incredibly capable within certain parameters, but when adversaries step outside those parameters, refuse fighting war we prepared for, exploit vulnerabilities rather than play to strengths, prioritize survival over victory, advantages erode. We're discovering that in real time. Lessons being learned will influence how adversaries challenge American power for years. Iran proving asymmetric, patient, attritional warfare can frustrate even world's most powerful military. That's lesson shaping conflicts for decades to come. Let me give you final thoughts. The U.S. military is the most powerful fighting force in history. We have unmatched capabilities, superior technology, advanced training, sophisticated logistics. None of that's in question. But military power operates within constraints, political, economic, industrial, strategic. We're discovering those constraints matter more than assumed. You can have the best military yet not achieve strategic objectives if the enemy fights in ways exploiting your constraints rather than challenging strengths. Iran understood this. They never tried building a military to defeat America conventionally. Instead, they built forces designed to survive American conventional attack and make war too costly to continue. They invested in capabilities targeting American vulnerabilities, cheap mass systems, depleting expensive precision munitions, intelligence networks, enabling strikes on high-value assets, patient resistance outlasting American political will. It's working. Not perfectly, Iran has suffered enormously, but working well enough that 4 weeks in, they're still fighting, still striking back, still demonstrating American military power alone cannot produce quick, decisive victory against prepared, committed adversary fighting asymmetrically. Tomahawk crisis exemplifies industrial constraint. AWACS destruction exemplifies intelligence vulnerability. Base security problems exemplify force protection challenge. Domestic political tensions exemplify sustainability question. All are strategic problems unsolvable by tactical excellence or technological superiority. Senior Pentagon officials understand this privately. Behind closed doors, there's acknowledgement war isn't going as planned. Recognition fundamental assumptions were wrong. Debate about adjusting. But publicly, narrative remains operation successful, pressure mounting, victory achievable. That disconnect between private reality and public messaging is itself strategic problem. American adversaries see it. They see we can't sustain current operations indefinitely. They see stockpiles depleting, global posture weakening. They see opportunity. China making calculated South China Sea moves, Russia testing Eastern Europe boundaries, North Korea escalating provocations. All understand American military power is finite, currently committed elsewhere. This is cascading strategic cost, not just Persian Gulf happenings. Global impact as adversaries recognize American limitations and adjust strategies accordingly. Every day tied down in Iran means less able to respond elsewhere. Every resource expended unavailable for other contingencies. Every limitation exposed as intelligence for adversaries. Hard truth, we may have entered new era of American military power. Era where incredible capabilities are real but insufficient for decisive victory against prepared adversaries fighting asymmetrically. Era where technological advantages matter but don't guarantee success. Era where defense industrial base struggles sustaining high-intensity operations. Era where political system lacks patience for protracted conflicts. Iran is test case. They're proving relatively weak adversary if properly prepared and strategically patient.